Yeah, so that photograph is of me and Dad standing on the patio outside the garage door, just the back doors, the house that I grew up in a village called South Wonston in Winchester. And it was taken by my nan. I actually found it in a box of old kind of film prints. We kind of cleared out my nan and granddad's house, and I was looking through lots of the old photographs that my nan took. And as you can see, it looks like we're doing some serious sweeping up. We've got some jobs to do, and we're getting on with it. It just felt kind of a really kind of right image to use. I mean, if Dad was at home and the sun was up, he was kind of in the garden working, and he worked like amazingly hard on that garden. It was a real kind of passion for him. He'd grown up on a farm in Cornwall, and I think at some point he kind of considered going back to farming, and there was almost an option that before me and my sister were around after he was married to my mum, that they were going to go back and kind of buy another farm, and he would work with his brother, my uncle, to kind of build the kind of family business a bit. And for whatever reason, that I think he decided against it. There's actually a sheet where he's kind of written all the pros and cons down of why should we move to Cornwall, why shouldn't we? And I think he's thinking about what opportunities the kids he hasn't yet had will have if they're in Cornwall compared to Winchester, and thinking mainly about my mum and the work she's doing as a music teacher in Hampshire and that sort of thing. So, but almost I don't know. Maybe I'm putting words into his mouth almost, but he didn't have the opportunity to work on the farm, so he had his garden, and he kind of landscaped it, so there was grass and a loop of paving for us to ride our bikes around, and flower beds down each side, and the bottom half was all set out for fruit and veg, and he would grow and cultivate fruit and veg throughout the year, and we'd eat whatever we needed on the on the kitchen table, and if we couldn't eat it, it would get put in the freezer, and we'd have it through the year, or he'd take it to church, and people there was a lady who made jam, and he'd give her rhubarb every week and this sort of thing. So the garden was a real passion, and as a kid I would go and help him in the garden. I mean, I say help, I probably got in the way more than helping him out, but I'd kind of do sweeping or dig for worms and things like that. I remember especially kind of I would always try and dig for treasure in the garden, just as a kid with an imagination, and for what I would always find treasure regardless of wherever I was digging. And only in recent years did I find out that that's because my dad would get his big shovel and just dig one hole and put an old coin or an old piece of pottery or something in that hole, cover it over, and then he'd tell me where to dig, and I'd dig there with my little shovel or my little trowel or whatever, and I'd always find treasure and be super excited about it. But yeah, I've just got amazingly fond memories of being in the garden and spending time with Dad there, with my sister and my mum, and chasing the chickens around, and it just feeling like a really kind of secure place where we had fresh air and amazing views over the countryside out the back, and just really happy. I went to work in his office a few times, and that I kind of saw a different side to him there a little bit. He was very much like the fun guy in the office, a real joker, and he was the manager, but he'd always be kind of, I don't know whether it was kind of keeping morale high or just, I think it was just genuinely enjoying having time with some close friends, and they'd have their little in jokes, and I'd be sitting there sorting out paperwork, and they'd be having a laugh together, and then he'd go back and steer the ship and keep his work going. And there were people at work. I remember one chap especially who kind of worked out in the yard, and he'd said, your dad's a good chap. He gave me a second chance, and I think this guy, has come into this job and not quite, things hadn't gone right for him for whatever reason up until that point, and my dad had seen that he was a good, honest chap and given him a job, and Dad did things like all the drivers at the company when he got there, they didn't have uniforms, so Dad made sure they kind of all had uniforms. They all felt smart and part of the company, and they were representing the company, and he kind of mobilised people in that way. For me, he was always there. So if there was anything I needed, if I wasn't sure about something or needed to resolve a situation or just advice, it wasn't necessarily that he always had the answer, but there was always a solution or some sort of resolution. He would just kind of put my mind at ease, and that was always just so reassuring. I just knew he was kind of always there. it was very tricky actually to see him unable to help himself, but he was very strong throughout the whole thing, almost to the extent that he didn't let it affect anyone else to a great extent, except really my mum, because my mum was looking after him. But for the first couple of years, maybe even 3 years of his illness, he was having treatment, but he barely told anybody. He told people, he told friends, a few friends, close family, and definitely his boss at work, but probably not even the people he worked alongside, just because he didn't want it to affect how he operated and how people related to him. And for whatever miracle reason, he went through all this treatment and he didn't lose any hair. In fact, his hair grew even more. Like it was a bit crazy. It kind of went under the radar for so long, and maybe it's just that he didn't want us to talk about it. He didn't want it to affect things, and so for quite a while, I knew that Dad had cancer, but it didn't seem to make any difference. And then, gradually, I think we always knew that it wasn't going to end very well, but only in the last couple of years, and then really in the last 6 months did it kind of get really to the point where it was really serious. But even for me, like, he died just after Christmas, which was 30th of December in 2009, and he stayed at home for that Christmas. And I remember me and my brother-in-law Rob, because Dad had said he couldn't face eating any Christmas lunch, and we were like, that's fine, that's fair enough. And it got to the moment where kind of everybody else had to be in the kitchen sitting eating their Christmas lunch, and he couldn't really get out of the chair, and so he said, right, let's do it. And so me and Rob literally like seat lifted him, carried him into the kitchen, and like put him on a chair, and we had Christmas lunch together. And then I think either the day or 2 days after that, kind of the doctor came around and said, I think you might need to go to the hospital because he was in a lot of pain. And I think he just said, yeah, okay. And that confused me, because I was like, I've got pictures of that Christmas, and he looks so ill. He looks so kind of frail and thin and pale, and at the time I just didn't see it, because that's just my dad. It wasn't like here's this really ill man. He was still there, and he kept on going so well. But then I think I knew once he'd said, oh, I think I kind of questioned it. I was like, he almost kind of just said, oh yeah, I'll just go to the hospital. I was like, well, yeah, he doesn't need to do that. And if you look at the pictures, he obviously did. But then even the night before, I remember us being in the hospital, Mum saying to me, I'm going to stay, but you take everyone else home. So I took everyone else home. And even then it hadn't even quite clocked that it was going to be close. And I think I remember sitting down with my sister and her husband Rob and Sarah as well, and we kind of sat together and we kind of chatted and prayed, and that felt really sort of kind of special. I don't quite know what kind of went on, but then I remember Mum called at like, must have been 6 the next morning, and we went in and we were kind of all there, and he passed away really peacefully. But even then he kind of kept on going and kept saying, right, you've got to look after the garden, and you've got to look after Mum. I was like, yeah, and this is the guy that needs to play organ at the funeral. he thought it through, and he said something to us all then about faith, which we'd never really heard him talk about. I mean, we used to come away from church on a Sunday and talk about things, but he told us all to make sure we put our faith in action, and it was a phrase that no one had ever heard him say before. But literally lying there in hospital, last half an hour of his life, he was saying, that's the one thing you need to do, make sure you put your faith into action. And that's something that will stick with me forever.
Yeah.
But that was, those few words, faith in action, is exactly what he did, like his whole life, right up until the end. And he didn't stop believing like that he could still just be a great dad and a great husband, and he didn't ever kind of let go. I had to call Dad's office and tell them, and these are people that he's worked with for years and years and years, and they've been so close, and you you know, and I knew them as well because I'd worked in the office a little bit, but you know, having to tell, I spoke to a chap called Adi on the phone. He was a lovely guy, and I could just hear him kind of crumpling on the other end of the phone and not really knowing what to do, and then also having to tell, you know, the guys that we went to the Saints games with, and you kind of just drift along, and then there are certain things you have to do, and you kind of carry on with life, but then you go through all those kind of stages of trying to process it in whatever way you think you can process it, and not really understanding. And I remember the memorial service was a really good thing to go through, because it felt like a celebration, because this church that we'd been to our whole lives was full. Like, there were people standing at the back.
Yeah.
And I was sat at the front just going, I don't usually sit at the front. I usually sit over there. Why am I sat at the front? And then all these people that I knew coming up and saying nice things. Adi had put together a book of letters from like the company clients that people had sent stuff and said, you know, how it was, you know, and so that sort of thing. People saying, you know, people from Sainsbury's or whatever saying, oh yeah, Peter was amazing to work with and helped me in this situation, and reading these things out that you just otherwise would never have known about. And then the choir that Dad sang in were like on the other side, like singing their hearts out for this guy, you know. It's just like, and so that was a real kind of, that felt like a really good thing to do and celebrate. But then I suppose it was a case of, you know, like I talked about earlier, if there was something that I needed to sort out, you think, right, well, who do I call? And you just think, well, I've got to do it myself. I've got to tell myself I've got to do this. And so I suppose that, you know, there are things like that, especially when I got back to, I had to come back up to Manchester and finish my degree. That was the last 3 or 4 months of my degree, and so I just had to get my head down and get it done. I suppose you just learn to cope, really. The biggest thing for me is the fact that he's not there for my mum. That's the thing that pains me the most, is the fact that I see my mum sometimes struggling, or, you know, having to make decisions in her life that she should be making with my dad, that she should be making decisions about what she wants to do, and she's about to become a grandma for the first time, and my dad should be becoming a granddad for the first time, because my sister's having a baby, and that's incredible news, and the family's delighted, but, you know, he should be there, and he's not, and that's never going to change. And I mean, that was one of the first things I thought when I got engaged, and I thought, you know, one day I'll have kids, and the kids, they'll have, you know, Sarah's dad, and he'll be an incredible granddad, but they won't have. I had 2 granddads when I was growing up, and that was great, and my dad would have made an amazing granddad, and he won't be there. So it doesn't get any easier in that sense, because there's still that big hole there. I don't think I let that sort of sadness kind of creep in as much anymore, and that makes it sound like I control it, but I think you can choose to kind of let it affect you or not. And one of the things that I thought would happen, I thought that, you know, because we all lose people in life, and I thought the next person that I lost would be a real blow. I thought, having lost Dad, I thought, you know, that's really kind of, that's a big impact, and I thought whoever I lost next, and that would really kind of destroy me. And I lost my granddad not that long ago, and actually I felt like I coped pretty well with that, and that's not, you know, and it's hard to, I'm not trying to equate the loss in terms of I lost one more than I lost the other, but you know, if you're thinking about looking back at those old family photographs and who was there, and, you know, the people who were there and always were there when I was a kid, you know, aren't all there now, and so I think you spend more time thinking about things when everything was, you know, really strong as a family, and you could enjoy times together, and I think that's a really important part of why I'm investing time in doing this project, because I want to encourage people to talk about those things, and talk about stories, and talk about, you know, occasions that no one else remembers, but for whatever reason you remember it. For whatever reason, your relationship to that person is unique, and, you know, and so it would be easy to just look at old photos and just feel really sad about it, but you have to feel fortunate that you had it in the first place. And there's a lot of people who don't know their dads at all and miss out on a whole kind of part of their lives without somebody there to have that nudge and guide them through and provide for them, which I was so fortunate to have. There are still good things coming out of the fact that he's not with us, and that's just a really strange thing to say, but even the fact that I feel able to do a project like this project, Loved&Lost project, and already I can see that that's helping people think about things and have conversations. And there's no way I would be doing this unless I'd lost my dad. And this isn't the only thing, but for me to say this is, there are people having conversations or, feeling supported by the project as a result of, what happened is a positive thing for me. Yeah. And that may be part of the process of me processing everything and trying to make it feel like, there has to be some good that comes out of this, because otherwise it's just a horrible thing, and it's really painful and it's dreadful. And if that's the case, that's it. Fine, that's okay. I had a conversation not so long ago with a guy who's a kind of bereavement counsellor, kind of psychologist, and he was talking about an image which people can use. It, death is can be like a glass vase being pushed off a table, and for some people it takes years, and there's a kind of a gentle hand, and you can see the glass vase is going, and it's going, and it's going, and then it's gone, and it falls into a few pieces, maybe 3 or 4 pieces, and it's broken, but you can kind of put it back together fairly easily. You can see all the parts. You think, yeah, I can fit that back together, and I feel okay about that. And for other people, it's just like a punch in the dark. Somebody in an instant, in a flash, just like that vase is gone. It's gone off that table, and it's smashed, and it's in a million pieces. And there's literally no way you could possibly repair that. And for me, I just feel amazingly fortunate that I had that time, and I could see it coming. And I know I've talked about the fact that, even like the day before, I didn't feel like I knew it was coming. But I remember specifically writing him a letter, which is not something I'd ever done before. I'd never written my dad a letter. I could write everything like I wanted to say, like, you've been amazing. You're an amazing dad. It was all present tense. So you're an amazing dad, and I know you're ill, but you're fighting it, and we'll fight it together. And you've always provided everything I've needed, and you've always supported me, and you've helped me make good decisions. And I don't know where that is now, but I remember him getting it, and I remember him saying, when he was lying in hospital, saying thank you to me for that letter. And it meant a lot to him. And and there are things that you say in that moment when he's lying there and he's kind of semi-conscious, and you don't know if he's hearing it. And so I was really glad that for whatever reason I decided to write that letter and put it into words. Yeah. And I think it'd be really hard for me to go back and read that now. And so it's been 6 years and I've not gone to find it and read it, but it will be somewhere in my mum's house. But the fact that I said all those things and didn't have any regrets about kind of saying thank you in a way, which is weird because you don't often say thank you to your parents. I think the simplicity of how he lived his life, his passions were simple. It would be out in the garden and committing to whatever he put his time to, whether that was doing things at church and being the go-to guy for sorting things out, or leading at work. And he kind of led the family well, but without ever telling anyone seemingly what to do. It was kind of a very kind of led by example, and there wasn't any sort of fussing or stressing sort of thing. He seemed very kind of assured. But just the fact that he seemingly enjoyed life without having fast cars and elaborate holidays, and there are certain things which I think I've taken on from him. I try and lead by example, but I think he always wanted to try and, this is another thing actually, he always wanted to try and relate to everybody, and that's something I really want to try and do as well. I think because of his background, coming from living on a farm, fairly humble kind of Cornish upbringing. I don't think there's anyone he couldn't relate to. He would kind of meet anyone at their level, and I think that's an amazing quality to have, to not be kind of prejudiced or second guess anyone or try and put words in someone else's mouth. And that's something I'm still learning. I'm still too self-centered most of the time. I need to, if I could live as simply as Dad did and relate to everyone and anyone as he did, then I'll be happy.